So I read Anne of Green Gables as somewhat of an adult and pretty recently, so I'm not looking back at it with any kind of rose-colored nostalgia glasses, and I loved it. It's maybe one of my top 10 favorite books. Anne as a protagonist, she's just so perfect. She has this rich fantasy imagination in her life, but she's also loves the world and is an explorer and an adventurer and is not afraid to show her emotions, wears her heart on her sleeve, and then at the end of the book shows great sacrifice and shows she has no problem sacrificing her own happiness, her own adventures for the people that did things for her and for her own family. So she's just a perfect character, and you really see her win over society, win over the world through her goodness. Now, in the adaptation, and this is the main reason I think it just goes off course, rather than her through her goodness winning over the society, you see her battling and struggling against just an awful, awful society around her. And really, the book, it does not seem like a scathing critique on 1908 Canadian society. And it's interesting, it was written in a relatively positive time. Obviously, shortly after, there's recessions, two debilitating world wars, which were all for the world, but in particular Canada. So, but the time that it was written wasn't a time of great horror and misery. So I think a lot of the awful elements that were put on for realism, is it really realism, or are you treading into just inserting stuff for shock value? And even if you say, look, all these horrible things that we see depicted so graphically, well, that's just how society was, and we have to show realism, how society, how it is. Now I understand the people. So Zack Snyder, very famous, notorious director. He's directed superhero movies as of late, and he injects these beloved characters, Superman, to a lesser extent Batman, with all this darkness and grit and realism. And people who grew up with these characters, they say, why? Like, why? Take your darkness and your realism somewhere else. It doesn't belong here in the superheroes genre. And I've never understood those arguments. Now I completely understand them, because Anne, she's not a superhero. She doesn't have superpowers, but she has an almost supernatural optimism, warmth, sense of goodness about the world, and that's, for me, the important message there. And to add all these extra important topics, abuse, bullying, classism, just vicious, being a social pariah, child abduction, feminism, all these weighty, important issues, there was already an important message there in the book that obviously resonated with so many people, and to add all these additional issues, I don't think is necessary. And if you look at all the characters, Rachel, the gossip, she gets humanized to a large extent, but most other characters, Gilbert, I wasn't a big fan of, but I guess he's supposed to be a very, very good character, and the farmhand, he's delightful. But other than that, the teacher is horrible, the banker obviously is horrible, the reverend is awful, was not so in the book, the feminist book club, they're horrible, all of the town, all the other parents of the town, everyone is just, the other boys, every boy other than Gilbert at the school is just horrible characters, and you really feel it's like, the best way to describe it is Hannah Baker. This is Hannah Baker from 13 Reasons Why, transplanted back into old-timey Canadian society, just a pure vessel in this horrible, uncaring, cruel world, trying to survive. And again, like I said, that wasn't the message of the book. It wasn't about a gritty survivor. It was about this optimist and this vessel of goodness who just inspired and won over the world, rather than someone just struggling to survive. And even visually I see this now. If you look at the outfits, the home decor, it's obviously very drab and bleak and muted tones, which is fine, but even the grounds and the landscape itself, when I was reading the book, you just imagine just this paradise and just the beauty and full vibrant colors, and it looked kind of ordinary and kind of washed out and not particularly striking. And you could say that's some kind of meta commentary about how imagination can make things seem much greater than they are, and, you know, glories to the powers of imagination, but I think that's giving it too much credit. Now, I think writer, maybe creator as well, she wrote one of the most acclaimed episodes of TV history, one of the last episodes of Breaking Bad, which was a fantastic episode. And I think this really does show that when you have someone who's incredibly talented heading up a project, and you have great source material, you have great casting, and I thought everyone involved gave great performances, but the person in charge, even though they're very talented, they don't really understand why the source material was so important for so many people and really connected with people, and they have their own her unique take on the source material. And I was reading a couple articles trying to get inside the head of the people, and some rather Orwellian quotes about reinterpreting past history. I think one was like, well, we tried to do storylines that if the author had written, 5 more pages, we tried to find those storylines. And then another that I tried to mine what wasn't there, but actually was there all along. And quotes that made it seem like they just didn't really understand the story. One of the quotes said, you read Anne, the character, and it's about pain. She's in pain. And you read the book and there's pain. I guess maybe she should be in pain, but what's so inspiring about her is that she's not in pain, and she's not sad and miserable. She's happy and she's excited, and she has this enthusiasm for life and curiosity and exploring and expressiveness. And it's the complete opposite of someone who's suffered this great pain, and someone who's maybe should be in pain and has suffered great loss, but nonetheless doesn't let that dampen this kind of childlike enthusiasm and wonder, and that's what wins everybody over. Now, I think it's clear that to some extent, I don't think the adaptation really succeeded. I think if you look at the trend, interest kind of went up when the first season came out and then tapered right back off again. So I don't think this really made a mark like they intended to make, to take this really important thing to a lot of people, add all these weighty themes and create this kind of impact. And I think it's a good example of not trusting that the source material that you're given has something there, that just because it's very popular, sometimes people, they get the source material, they have to make a TV show or a movie out of it, and they say, God, there's nothing here. It's I don't know why people like this, so we're gonna add all this, we're gonna add all these important things that are relevant and timely and topical, and we'll make it good, rather than just looking and trusting and maybe asking around and finding, well, why is it? It's already good. You don't need to add all this extra stuff. Zack Snyder, when he had to make a movie about Superman, he's like, God, what are we going to do with this guy? Like, I don't understand why people like this guy so much. He's kind of a boring superhero, so he tried to add all this stuff, which I personally liked, but again, a lot of big fans of Superman didn't really like it all. But I will say, I've been really hard on it. It wasn't terrible. A lot of things it did really well. The writing, like I said, clearly the writer having such a pedigree you'd expect. The writing and the literary, I want to say lyricism, but it's not lyricism. The quotes, the words that were used, the flowery language, it was on point. It was fantastic. The casting, like I said, was great. The performances, and that scene where Michael, he's tracking Anne down, and eventually she doesn't want to go home with him because she's very hurt and upset. And then he says, some guy's like, hey, is this man bothering you, to Anne? And he's like, hey, this is my daughter. And then she immediately just, it hits her. That was a fantastic scene. That wasn't in the book. That was something they completely came up with on their own. And I thought it was fantastic. It worked so well. But that was one of the rare cases where I feel like all these additions improved it. For the most part, I think it just took away. And again, with Michael, you had this wonderful character, this picture of quiet goodness and this clash of civilizations with him and Anne, who's so expressive, but nonetheless, they get along so well. And scenes that were recreated from the book where he wants to buy her a dress because, he wants to make her happy, and he goes to buy the dress and he knows nothing about dresses, so he's kind of fumbling his way. Was such a great scene. So, and all the other stuff they added with him, the suicide, the love interest, it's just unnecessary. And all the times they did stick with what was in the book, I thought it was great. And Marilla, the greatest thing when you're reading the book, you just love her kind of restrained, wry amusement and appreciation. She's very, stern and restrained, but when Anne is her theatrics and her antics, she can't help but kind of be amused, but she kind of tries to hide it, and it's this kind of grudging laughter and amusement. And the actress, the performance, the direction, everything was fantastic, and that came across so well. So again, I feel like, yeah, and we'll see how season 2 goes, but this was just such a missed opportunity, because I think they really did have clearly talented writers and direction. They picked really good people to portray it, and yeah, it's just this kind of weird need to put stuff into stories that are already important and are already good, and sometimes just faithfully recreating something is the way to go.